Hi, I'm Hannah Pinkham. I am the Trust Assistant Principal for Research and Development in Languages for Dixon's Academies Trust. That is my Twitter handle at Hannah Pinkham, and my email address is on the screen as well. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about how I teach reflexive verbs. So the reason for wanting to talk about reflexive verbs is that I kind of came against this problem first as a student learning languages, and my teachers told me they were verbs you do to yourself, and I just didn't really understand what that meant, and obviously it sounds a bit gross. So weirdly, I then continued using that definition because I didn't have a better one with my own students, and obviously I didn't understand it, they didn't understand it, and because of that they didn't remember it, and I couldn't really see like a really clear link to English because of a lot of the things you say that are reflexive in French or Spanish aren't in English. So that didn't even really work at that level. And it just felt really abstract. And I really don't like things that are really abstract. I like to make things as concrete as possible for pupils to help them to make progress. So the solution. First of all, I started by looking up the actual definition, and I'm a bit embarrassed to say this happened a lot later on in my teaching career than it should have done. So the actual definition of a reflexive verb is a verb whose subject and object are the same. So the object is always a reflexive pronoun. Right, easy. However, I know what that is, but for my pupils, there's quite a big prior knowledge gap in order to help them to understand that definition. So the key areas, as I'm sure you can imagine, are that they don't know about grammatical subject and grammatical object. So my solution to that is that I will start with the English subject and object and help them to recognize that. Then I will add on French or Spanish subject and object, and then, and only then, would I start talking about reflexive verbs. So I'm going to talk you through a kind of brief lesson sequence on how I would explain this to pupils. So to start with, if your pupils aren't sure what a verb is and cannot confidently and 100% recognize a verb in French or Spanish or English, then probably they're not ready for reflexive verbs, and it's worth doing some initial work on verb recognition before they start talking about anything more complex. So we as a department have a shared set of definitions. Those are shared, they should be shared with the EAL department and the English department, and if everyone is using those same definitions, that makes things a little bit easier. And you know that if people start a year 7 class with you and then go to another teacher for the year 8 or year 9 or whatever, then they're not going to have a kind of uniformative experience. We'll just help their understanding. So the definition that we have of a verb is an action or a state of being, crucially not a doing word, because what are you doing if you're saying I was? That's not an action. So you've got that extra bit of a state of being as well. So I start very simply by getting pupils to copy the actual definitions into their book. So we've already talked about verbs before, they're really confident on verbs, and now we're ready for this extra reflexive verb bit. So I give them the definitions of grammatical subject and grammatical object. And when they're writing them down, I would reassure them and say, it doesn't matter if you don't understand what this means now, you're going to by the end of lesson, unit, whatever it is, depending on how long your pupils will take with these things. So they copy those down in the back of their books or wherever they record their grammar information. Then we'd start with some really, really carefully chosen examples in English. The reason these need to be really carefully chosen is because these same examples are then going to be used to exemplify reflexive verbs. So you need to make sure that they make sense as non-reflexive verbs and as reflexive verbs. And you'll see what I mean when we get to the reflexive verbs in English. So first of all, I will take pupils through an I, we, you sequence. So me modeling and then me modeling with them and then them working independently in recognizing the subject, the verb and the object. So I've got Hannah enjoyed the film. I will tell them that Hannah is the subject. Hannah is the person or thing who's doing the action of the verb. The verb is enjoyed. And the film is the person or thing that's receiving the action of the verb. That's what's being done to you. So the film is being enjoyed by me. Then I would talk through the next one. I would say, where is the subject in this sentence? And the pupils hopefully would answer he, and then the verb, and then the object. At this point, you can see that I've used some color coding. The color coding is just to facilitate, I kind of add an extra level of understanding for the pupils, and it does help in the target language sentences with some of the weirder bits, which we'll come to in a second. And then I would get the pupils doing one on their own. So they'd copy this one in their books. Ideally, they're using the color coding as well. And then they're recognizing that the subject and the verb and the object are like that. It's really important at this point to point out that the subject and the object are different. So the subject, Hannah, is not the same as the film. He is not the same as the children, and I am not my mum. Then we would start with the reflexive verb definition. So at this point, we're still just keeping in English. So the pupils would copy this down. You can see that I've removed a bit about reflexive pronouns from the original definition because I think it would cloud their understanding. In terms of getting really clear, accessible definitions for grammatical things, I really love using English language learners dictionaries. So these are aimed at people who are learning English as a foreign language, and the way they define them are just much simpler and therefore more accessible, I mean, for me and everyone, hopefully. So they'd copy this down. Again, I would reassure them, it doesn't matter if you're not sure what this is yet, you will know soon. And then we look at some carefully chosen examples in English. So you'll note that these are the same verbs that we had before as non-reflexive verbs, now used in their reflexive form. I think having the same verbs really highlights how the kind of subject-object similarity bit is really important. So let's have a look. So we've got Hannah enjoyed herself. Again, I would take pupils through the I, we, you process. So Hannah is the subject, enjoyed is the verb, and herself is the object. Again, I'm using the same color coding, exactly the same process. Then I would get the pupils to do one with me. So where is the subject? Where is the verb? Where is the object? And then one independently, subject, verb, object. If at this point the pupils weren't able to do this, then I would have to reteach and give them some more examples. There's no point moving on to target language examples if they're still struggling with the English examples. This time, I'd make sure that I'm emphasizing that the subject and the object are the same. So Hannah and herself are the same thing. He and himself are the same thing. I and myself are the same thing. That's why these are reflexive verbs, because the subject and the object are the same. Then we would check for understanding. So it's kind of a pause point, just to check that we're ready for the next bit of the learning. So I check that pupils are able to tell me what a grammatical subject is and what a grammatical object is. And then I'd know that they're ready for the next thing. So this time we're looking at the target language. I've got Spanish and French examples because those are the languages that I teach. So we've got a French example. I'd put it in English as well, just to support that understanding so that pupils aren't in danger of being cognitively overloaded. So I don't want them to be worrying about the meaning of the sentence as well as thinking about the grammar. So I take away the meaning problem so they can focus 100% on the grammar. So I've got a French example, again, same color coding being used. Talk them through using I, we, you, subject, verb, object. And then we'll have one that pupils will do with me, or depending on how confident they are, if they're ready for an independent one, they can do it themselves. Subject, verb, object. Great. And again, we're emphasizing that just like English, these verbs have a subject and an object that are different. So je and la voiture are different. I and the car are different. Mon père and le bébé are different. My dad and the baby are different. I would do a little check for understanding here, just to be really sure that they know what we're talking about. This might not be necessary with some of your classes, but I like to be really, really sure that they're clear. So which word means I, which word means car, which word means wash, just making sure that we're really following. And I target those at pupils that often find these things confusing to really probe their understanding. Then we would look at, then I'm going to just show you some Spanish ones just to kind of give you an example. For Spanish, I would put the pronoun in, even though obviously we wouldn't always have it. This just helps that pattern to flow really clearly, and it will help people to understand it more clearly. I also put the a personal in with the object, just because we don't need to talk about a personal here, because that will kind of cloud their understanding. So the color coding is quite a good way of kind of almost like brushing over that bit that's quite tricky at this point. So again, we're going for I, we, you, subject, verb, object. Color coding is the same, English translation the same, and then we've got an independent one, yo visto a mi hijo, very nice. And again, emphasizing that the subject and the object are different. I am not the dog, yo, I'm not mi hijo, fine, and that's the same as English. Again, we do a mini check for understanding. Then we'd have a kind of pause point and check that pupils are ready for looking at reflexive verbs in the target language. So again, we just make sure they know what a reflexive verb is. And if they didn't, I would go back and reteach that and give them those same examples from English so that they're ready to have that kind of knowledge not from to English to then transfer it to the target language examples. Then we've got the same verbs again, but this time as reflexive verbs. So again, using the same color coding, the same process, so that none of this is in danger of overloading the pupil's working memory. So, je me lave, I wash myself. Again, same color coding, translation, all of that is really clear for pupils. This is where I actually really like PowerPoint for this, because I think the appearing of the subject, verb, object is nice because it appears in kind of an order that they don't expect. Maybe they do expect by now. So we've got subject, verb, object. And you can make quite a big deal. Oh, hang on, that's in a weird place. Oh gosh, oh, you know, kind of go into your teacher crazy persona. And then an independent one, perhaps, subject, verb, object. Oh, it's different. And then you need to emphasize here that the subject and the object are the same. So I am myself, mon père is himself, and this is exactly the same as English. So these are reflexive verbs because the subject and the object are the same. Then we do some guided noticing to help pupils really hone in on the things that are key here. So what do you notice about the position of the subject and object in reflexive Spanish sentences? Obviously, you've got the object before the verb. Which word means myself? And then tell them that this is a reflexive pronoun. So that's the first time I talk about reflexive pronouns because then they're kind of ready to access that knowledge. Just look at some Spanish examples. Again, maintaining that pronoun there just for clarity. So yo me baño, subject, verb, object. Same thing again. Yo me visto. Same thing again. And the same guided noticing. To follow up, we might look at practicing identifying subject, verb, object in English. We might do that in some target language sentences. I might have a mix of reflexive or non-reflexive verbs. We might look at identifying reflexive or non-reflexive verbs just to get them used to the appearance of that reflexive pronoun. And possibly, depending on how they're getting on with that, depending on their ability to conjugate verbs, etc., we might look at reflexive verbs for other grammatical persons, but we might not. That totally depends on the class that you're teaching. Thanks very much. Bye.